Welcome to Universal Design Stories of Change. This podcast series aims to gather the experiences of persons with disabilities in Norway and internationally in order to gain a greater understanding of the benefits of universal design for persons with disabilities and everyone. We would like to thank the Norwegian Directorate for Children, Youth, and Families for their support, and the amazing team from Inclusive Creation for making it all happen. Enjoy this episode.
Okay. Can I ask you to state your name?
Yeah, I'm Samantha Renke, and I'm a broadcaster and disability rights campaigner.
Amazing. And you have got such a great energy and awesome vibe. And so I want to get in your words, what could businesses do better to make your life more fulfilling, easier, more able to participate?
Yeah, so I'm a physically disabled woman. I'm petite stature. I'm a full-time wheelchair user. And I guess I started off my career in the world of teaching, and I found that really problematic. It's really interesting because a lot of people assume that the children were the ones that made it problematic, but actually the children were the ones that were the most accepting. It was actually the adults and the other teaching staff that, really allowed their unconscious bias to dictate my working environment. So I'll give you an example of an ableist microaggression. Instead of calling me Miss Renke, they would call me Sam or Samantha in front of the children and really undermine my authority. So this, I think they say like microaggressions are like death by a million paper cuts.
Yeah.
So I think for me, we can identify that, a disabling world and disabling barriers, they can be split into three different categories: physical, information and communication, and attitudinal barriers. And of course, me as a physically disabled woman, you would think that physical barriers are the ones that I struggle with, daily. And of course, that is true. But actually, physical barriers can easily be removed.
Yeah.
They don't have to cost a lot of money.
No.
They just need to be planned.
Yeah.
Information, communication, exactly the same thing. But you cannot change the hearts and minds of someone that is, impacted with this insidious unconscious smog that we live in.
Yeah.
So I think what I'm often quoted saying is, particularly when I work with businesses, because you have a lot of senior management who happen to be a certain demographic, white males, and they don't think that they are biased. And I say, look, leave your ego at the door. So if someone who is disabled, or if someone is LGBTQ plus I, or whatever, protected, marginalised minority they are part of, or even if they're women, if they come to you and challenge you on ableism, or challenge you on racism, or whatever that might be, I say leave your ego at the door, because it is not a personal attack. It's not a personal criticism.
Yeah.
It is saying that, okay, we are all culpable of believing certain things about people.
Yeah, assuming.
That's okay, as long as we acknowledge our ignorance and say, look, we can all unlearn and relearn. So I think, challenging, attitudinal barriers is the main thing. And also, I deliver a lot of inclusion training. And although a lot of my clients want tangible solutions, they want policy reforms, and that's all really, really important. What I often say is that, we need to understand about disability culture, and we need to be very mindful of disability culture. So, for example, if I asked you, how do you think sensory rooms are inclusive? So if you're neurodivergent,
Right.
do you think that's an inclusive practice?
Right.
And people would be like, well, yeah, we've got a sensory room. That's so inclusive.
Yeah.
We thought about neurodiversity.
Yeah.
But a lot of my autistic friends will actually feel the opposite.
Oh.
They don't feel very inclusive because they're put into a separate
They're excluded
room.
by trying to include.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, it's, for some people that might be a really beneficial tool space to utilise.
Yeah.
But for me, it's about choice, and it's about saying that let's not look at policy reform through an abled gaze or an enabled gaze. Let's work with disabled people. We have a motto that comes from the civil rights movement, nothing about us without us.
Absolutely.
So disabled people, deaf, disabled and neurodivergent individuals need to be at the heart of everything that we do, and you need to consult with them, and not one shoe fits all.
No.
We're not a monolith.
No.
We are multifaceted, and that's what we need to work on, and that might be really, kind of a big undertaking, but it's an undertaking that we should really endeavour to
Absolutely.
accomplish.
Absolutely.
And I've been doing a lot of research on hybrid working environments and the benefits of that. But also, we are still programmed to believe that universal goals, are the way to go. And of course, we should all be striving for universal goals.
Sure.
However, we need to understand the importance of equity. So there's something called targeted universalism, which really looks at how we can target our policies. So, for example, understanding equity and really empowering people through that while still encouraging universal policy setting.
Absolutely. So insightful. So I'm wondering, I teach a lot of students who are part of the Gen Z generation.
Which ones are them again?
What's that?
Which ones are them again? How old are they?
They're in their 20s, in their early, mid-20s.
Okay, cool.
And a lot of them have aspirations to become entrepreneurs. And I'm wondering if your advice for them would differ from what you would advise a corporate.
I think the way that we work is less linear nowadays. I think social media, I think also the pandemic has highlighted how we don't have to conform to, typical working standards.
Sure,
and I actually think that, for me, I was in a typical working environment and it was not differentiated. If anything, it made my health decline, it impacted my mental well-being. And the best thing that I did was to take myself out of that environment and become my own boss.
I want to talk to you about intersectionality because
that's a good one.
You identify as a woman with a disability, if I'm
I
not
do.
mistaken.
I do.
So what does that mean to you when it comes to participating in society? I mean, we just had an incident where unconscious bias was very relevant.
Yes.
So I just wanted to hear your perspective on this and what businesses can do to accommodate and support.
I think before I explain my own experience of intersectionality, I think it's, it was very much the zeitgeist of a few years ago, and it was, the buzzword, and all of a sudden everyone was talking about intersectionality, and rightly so. But I think what the feedback that I got from my own community, so although I am a physically disabled woman, I am a public figure and I engage with my community on a regular basis, so I really get a lot of feedback, and I hope to kind of explore that in my own education on my own disability awareness. And intersectionality was so from other marginalized groups. So I think as I'm a cis white woman, although I've got physical disability. But what I was getting, particularly during Black Lives Matter, was, a lot of my black disabled friends felt really underrepresented. And I think we really need to address that. And, we talked about kind of microaggressions and how harmful those can be. And I kind of like to talk about the spin on microaggressions, which is called microaffirmation.
Yes.
And, and I was just like little small acknowledgements of that person's identity and individuality. So when we talk about, how to be a good anti-ableist, or how we can be, a good ally, when I talk about microaffirmations, that also, encompasses, intersectionality. And a big one, it might sound really simple, but a big one is don't look at someone with a disability, particularly if it's a visible disability, and think that their disability identity is all that
matters.
It matters, and that can be just as simple as using pronouns.
Yeah.
So, just for the record, we nearly crashed the car.
Yes. It was a pedestrian just decided to walk out in the middle of the intersection, so that was exciting.
Always exciting. As someone with brittle bones, it's always even more exciting. So it's like Russian roulette, isn't it? Yes, lost my train of thought. So even just by when you're in this same space as someone with a disability, recognise that they are multi-layered, and even asking them what their pronouns are, if they use pronouns, how they identify. That is, again, it might sound really common sense. It may sound really insignificant to an onlooker, but feeling heard, feeling seen is the greatest form of being empowered. And I think that sometimes when we look for solutions, we want something really groundbreaking, and we want something really that we can go away and go, wow, that's that's so powerful. But actually, what we need to do is take 10 steps back and actually break, kind of unpack some of the harm that happens, and it can be simple things like microaffirmations. I think for me, when I heard about intersectionality and how that impacted my life, it was really interesting because I felt like my disability identity always came above even being a woman, like always.
Yeah.
You know, and then now, you know, at the age of 37, and as someone who would love to start a family, and as someone who has faced, you know, sexual assault, and as someone who gets preyed upon by, you know, kind of predators, and I'm often objectified as a disabled woman in those terms. And I actually, you know, I wrote my memoir last year, You Are the Best Thing Since Sliced Bread. Just plug that in there.
I love it. I love it.
And a big part of that was, you know, looking at motherhood and looking about at my place in the world as a woman, and, you know, looking at how a lot of men would dismiss me because they wouldn't see me as a mother, or they wouldn't see me as a sexual being, and how that impacted my self-worth. But also, you know, reflecting on those closest to me, I've, up until recently, because I've now spoken about it, no one had ever asked me if I wanted to get married.
Oh, wow.
No one's ever asked me if I wanted to start a family.
No.
And that's how intersectionality and being a physically disabled woman has probably impacted my life the most.
Yeah, how it manifests.
You know, and it's really interesting. I write for the Metro column here in the UK. I have a regular, like, fortnightly online column, and I wrote about I wrote exactly about that, about motherhood, and I wrote about, you know, people not wanting to. No one said to me, you know, even when I was a teenager, like, all my girlfriends were getting in relationships, and I was, again, really not part of that conversation.
Right.
And it was only, you know, I kind of found all my gay friends that they were much more, just because they wanted to know all the sordid detail about my sex life, like, they were much more expressive and curious and inclusive.
I was going to say.
Yeah. Maybe not always for the right reasons,
No.
but irrespective, I was at the table, you know. And funnily enough, a few people who have read it, who are part of the medical feedback, have been given to me, and, you know, the often the comment is, oh, well, you know, maybe people don't ask because they don't want to say something wrong,
Right.
and it's like, well, I appreciate that. And not all women want to be mothers. Not all women can have children, irrespective of disability or not. But I do believe that, you know, we still have such an awkwardness around disability, and we still other disabled people. And that's something that, you know, your own ignorance is actually adding more fuel to the marginalisation. So that's what I kind of have to think about that, really.
And does it just come down to agency, or to what extent is there like a need for just having a connection and a relationship before you kind of embark on those more difficult conversations?
Yeah, I mean, look, ultimately disabled people are not put on this earth for your education, or, you know, it's not appropriate for you to go up to a random disabled person in the street and ask intrusive questions, and that happens a lot. You know, I feel like I'm in a very different space because that's what I do for a living, and I'm you know, I'm more than happy to kind of be the guinea pig, so to speak, but that does not give you the right to kind of pick the brains of every
just
disabled
any rando,
person.